$900 million. Gone. Not from a war, not from a crash, not from anything the newspapers ever printed. Corvin Halverson built the most powerful financial empire in Gilded Age New York, and someone inside his own house quietly burned it to the ground over 18 months, one surgical transaction at a time. The question isn't how they did it. The question is, who did he make so invisible that they had nothing left to lose? Because the most dangerous person in any dynasty isn't the enemy at the gate. It's the one you stopped seeing. This is the story of what happens when power forgets that people keep score. Chapter 1. What the ledger could not measure. The number sits at the bottom of the page like a wound. $3.7 million. Corvin Halverson does not blink. He does not move. His hand rests flat against the leather surface of his desk, fingers spread wide, as though the wood beneath him might shift if he lets go. The candle beside the ledger throws a thin yellow light across the columns. Outside, Manhattan moves through its Thursday evening. Carriages, voices, the distant clang of a streetcar bell. None of it reaches him. The office has gone completely, utterly still. This is what remains. He closes the ledger, opens it again. The number does not change. Hi, viewers. Before we go any further into this story, I want to ask you something personal. Has anyone in your life ever smiled at you every single day and you had absolutely no idea what they were really after? Drop your answer in the comments right now. And if you've never seen this kind of story before, hit that subscribe button and like. Because what happens next inside this family will make your jaw drop. Now let's dive in. Corvin pushes back from the desk and stands. He walks to the window. Below him, Fifth Avenue carries on with its indifference. The wealthy, the working, the ordinary machinery of a city that does not know what just happened in this room. He watches them for a long moment. Then he turns back to the ledger, because the number is still there, and it still needs an explanation. The railroads were still running. The steel contracts had not evaporated overnight. The Halverson name still opened doors in the city the way a key opens a lock. Smooth, immediate, without resistance. From the outside, nothing had broken. From the outside, everything looked exactly as it had always looked. And that is the thing that sits heavier than the number itself. Something destroyed this empire from a direction no one was watching. The records show 18 months of quiet, consistent, surgical financial damage, deals collapsing at the final hour, contracts underbid by figures too precise to be guesswork, capital redirected through channels that left no clean trail. Corvin has reviewed every column twice. He has followed every figure to its source. And at the end of every trail, in the place where a name should appear, there is only one entry that does not fit the architecture of the machine he built. A private relationship. 4 words. Buried in a footnote between 2 quarterly reports. The kind of entry an accountant writes when he sees something he does not fully understand and does not want to name directly. Corvin understands it directly. He built this empire on a single philosophy that every variable inside a system could be controlled, measured, and assigned a value. Rail lines, steel tonnage, political relationships, Senate votes, supplier margins. He had reduced an entire industrial civilization to a set of manageable columns, and for 30 years the system had performed exactly as designed. He never assigned a column to loneliness. He never measured what happened to a person who lived inside the most powerful household in New York and was treated, every single day of their life, as furniture. The clock on the mantel reads 11:42. Corvin Halverson picks up a pen, sets it down, picks it up again. He writes one line at the top of a fresh page, not in the ledger, but in a separate notebook he keeps inside the locked drawer on the left side of his desk. The notebook where he writes the things that cannot appear anywhere official. The line reads, "She trusted the wrong man, and I gave her no reason to trust anyone else." He closes the notebook, locks the drawer, blows out the candle. The room goes dark, and somewhere across the city, in a brownstone apartment on a street that does not appear in any Halverson financial record, a man named Alaric Dune is counting money that was never supposed to leave this family, and he is not finished yet. Chapter 2. The empire did not begin with money. It began with a rule. Corvin Halverson wrote it down in 1879 in a 3-line memo distributed to every employee in his first rail office when the company was 18 months old and operating out of 2 rooms above a freight depot in Philadelphia. The memo read, "Every authorization requires a second signature. Every decision requires a second review. Every person in this organization is trusted, and that trust will be verified." That single rule, applied without exception for 22 years, built one of the most sophisticated financial systems in the history of American industry. 7 rail corridors, 41 steel contracts across 4 states, political relationships reaching into the Senate chambers of 3 different administrations, a dual authorization structure so precise that no single individual, not even Corvin himself, could move significant capital without a second signature confirming the action. The machine was not run on faith. It was run on architecture, and that architecture had been stress-tested against everything the late 19th century could produce. The Panic of 1873 hit while Corvin was 20 years old and running his first freight operation. He watched older, richer men lose everything in 6 weeks because their systems depended on trust rather than structure. He took notes, not because he was cold, but because he understood, in a way that most men his age did not, that sentiment was a variable that could not be controlled, and therefore had to be removed. He built the Halverson system specifically so that no single point of sentiment could bring it down. His eldest son Renwick, 29 years old in 1898, managed steel acquisitions. Renwick had his father's eyes and none of his patience, but he was precise with numbers and loyal without question. His second son Adair, 26, oversaw rail operations across the northern corridors, faster than Renwick. Slightly less disciplined, but effective. His brother-in-law Thurston managed Washington relationships and had not made a visible mistake in 11 years. Every role was documented. Every accountability was logged. The family operated like a company because Corvin had built it that way from the first day. Not out of coldness, but out of the absolute conviction that emotion, left unmanaged inside a financial system, was the equivalent of water inside a wall. It would find every crack, and over time, it would bring the whole structure down. He assigned his youngest daughter Lysandra a role that required no financial authority, no strategic input, and no access to internal operations. She attended events. She represented the family's social standing. She was beautiful, composed, and managed perfectly, a piece of the machine that served its function without ever touching the engine. Corvin believed this was protection. He did not understand at the time what he was actually building. The system that could not fail had one assumption buried inside every layer of its design, that the people who lived inside it were receiving enough from it to stay loyal to it. Renwick had authority. Adair had responsibility. Thurston had influence. They each had something that belonged to them, something that made their role feel like a life rather than a cage. Lysandra had a wardrobe and a calendar, and the system never once asked whether that was enough. Chapter 3. She is standing at the window of the second-floor drawing room on a Tuesday morning in April of 1897, watching a delivery cart move slowly down the street below. And she is thinking about nothing. This is new. For most of her 21 years, Lysandra Halverson's mind has been a crowded place. Sharp, fast, cataloging everything she hears at the dinner table, running silent calculations on the conversations her brothers have in the hallways, forming opinions that no one has ever once asked her to share. She is, by any honest measure, the quickest mind in the household. Her brothers know it. Her father knows it. It has never once changed how either of them speaks to her. But in the last 6 months, something has shifted. The mind that used to run constantly has started going quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet the way a room goes quiet when the last person who cares about it walks out. She stands at this window for 20 minutes before she realizes she has been standing there at all. Her mother, Eudora, died 4 years ago. Her father did not grieve in any visible way. The household absorbed the loss, the way the household absorbed everything. Efficiently, without acknowledgement, moving forward because forward was the only direction the Halverson system recognized. Lysandra was 17. No one asked how she was doing. She is dressed for a luncheon she does not want to attend, at the home of a family her father has been cultivating for the last 2 years because their son is 28, and manages a shipping corridor that connects to the Halverson rail network in ways that would be financially useful. The luncheon is not a social event. It is a negotiation. Lysandra is the offer on the table, and everyone in both households understands this, and no one will say so aloud. She turns from the window, picks up her gloves, puts them on. She does what she has always done, performs the function assigned to her with complete precision and zero complaint. She arrives at the luncheon. She is charming. She is composed. She asks the son 3 questions about his work, listens to the answers with visible interest, and deflects 2 personal inquiries with the kind of graceful redirection that requires real skill to execute. She returns home at 3 o'clock. Her father's secretary is waiting with a note. Good report from the Ashford household. Continue as directed. Not, how was your afternoon? Not, was the company pleasant? Not, are you all right? Continue as directed. She folds the note once and sets it on the side table and goes upstairs and sits on the edge of her bed and stares at the wall for a very long time. She's not angry. Anger requires energy. And anger requires the belief that something could be different. What Lysandra feels is something older and more dangerous than anger, a deep, spreading numbness that has no name and no address and no cure inside the walls of this house. She does not know yet that in 11 months, she will meet a man who will say her name and wait for her to speak before saying anything else. She does not know what that is going to cost her family. She does not know what it is going to cost her. Chapter 4. He walks into the benefit reception on the arm of no one. This is the first thing Lysandra notices about Alaric Doone. Not his face, not his clothes, not the easy way he moves through a crowded room, as though the space was arranged specifically for him. She notices that he arrived alone. In this world, in this era, in this particular category of New York social event, no one arrives alone unless they are either very confident or very deliberate. Alaric Doone is both. He is 30 years old, medium height, well-dressed without being overdressed. The suit is correct for the room, but carries no visible signaling about wealth or family name. He has dark eyes that move across a gathering with the quiet attention of someone who is cataloging rather than socializing. He takes a glass from a passing tray, does not drink from it, and positions himself at the edge of the east wall, where he can see the entire room without being the center of any particular conversation. Lysandra watches him for 4 minutes before she realizes she is watching him. She looks away, speaks briefly with the wife of a Pennsylvania congressman, moves toward the window on the north side of the room. When she glances back, he is gone from the east wall. The choice of speaker strikes me as odd, says a voice beside her. For a benefit specifically about industrial labor conditions, they've selected a man who has never worked a day inside a factory in his life. She turns. He is standing 2 feet away, holding the still untouched glass, looking not at her, but at the podium at the front of the room, where the evening speaker is arranging his notes. His expression is not performing. It is simply observing and sharing the observation, the way a person does when they are speaking a thought rather than constructing one. What do you think he should have said? Lysandra asks. He turns and looks at her directly. I don't know yet. What do you think? She tells him. He does not glance over her shoulder. He does not smile politely and redirect. He does not check the room to see whether someone more important has entered. He stands still, glass in hand, and he listens to her answer the way a person listens when the answer actually matters to them. When she finishes, he asks a follow-up question. This has never happened to her before. Not here. Not in any room in which the name Halverson is on the invitation list. They speak for 22 minutes. She learns almost nothing about him. His name? The name of a publishing venture he describes vaguely, a reference to time spent in Boston. He learns about the speaker, about the luncheon she attended last week, about her opinion on the proposed rail legislation currently sitting in the Senate. She shares all of this freely, without realizing until much later that she has shared it at all. because talking to him feels less like conversation and more like thinking out loud. When the program begins, they separate without ceremony. She takes her assigned seat. He moves toward the back of the room. She thinks about him for the rest of the evening. She thinks about the question he asked, not what do you do, or who is your father, or are you spoken for, but what do you think? 3 words. The 3 words no one in her household has ever once addressed to her. Alaric Doone knows exactly what he has just done. He does not look back across the room. He does not need to. In 22 minutes of careful, patient, precisely executed conversation, he has learned more about the internal structure of the Halverson operation than most of their direct competitors have gathered in years. And Lysandra walked out of the exchange feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like a person. Chapter 5. The second meeting happens 3 weeks later, at a gallery opening on Madison Avenue that both of their names appear on the same invitation list, something Alaric arranged through a mutual social acquaintance without leaving any visible trace of having arranged it. Lysandra does not know this. She sees him across the room and feels something she has not felt in so long she almost does not recognize it. Anticipation. A small, clean shot of it, moving through her chest before she has time to examine it or suppress it. She crosses the room without planning to. They stand in front of a large landscape painting and he asks her what she sees in it. She tells him. He listens. He asks another question. This is how it begins. Not with declarations, not with stolen glances across ballrooms, not with any of the dramatic machinery that the novels of this era use to describe the architecture of a private relationship. It begins with questions. It builds through answers. And it deepens because he remembers 3 weeks later, at the gallery, he references something she said at the benefit about the Senate legislation, asks whether she has read anything further on it. She had. She had read 3 articles and formed 2 opinions and had no one to share either of them with. By the 4th meeting, the conversations have moved past public events and into letters, short at first, carefully worded. Carried through a household servant named Della, whom Lysandra pays privately for discretion, because, whatever this is, she understands instinctively that it cannot move through the official household channels. Alaric's letters ask questions. They do not declare things. They do not pressure. They arrive every 10 days, precisely, like a schedule maintained by someone who understands that regularity builds trust faster than intensity. By the 6th letter, Lysandra is describing her days to him in detail. The Wednesday morning routine when her father reviews the rail accounts before any staff arrive. The way her brother Renwick travels north every 6 weeks for the supplier negotiations, leaving a 48-hour gap in the dual authorization schedule. The name of the family's primary financial intermediary in Washington, a man named Thaddeus Good, and the fact that Good reports directly to her father without copying the sons, which creates a window of information asymmetry that Renwick has been quietly complaining about for 2 years. She writes none of this as intelligence. She writes it as her life. She writes it the way anyone writes to the first person who has ever made them feel that their daily experience is worth documenting. She is not passing secrets. She is sharing herself, the texture of her confinement, the details of a household she has never had any power inside, the rhythms of a system that runs perfectly around her and never once includes her in its operation. Alaric reads every letter twice. The first time for the emotional content, the loneliness, the frustration, the specific quality of her isolation, which he mirrors back to her carefully in his responses to maintain the connection. The second time for the structural information, which he begins transferring to a separate document he keeps in a locked box in his apartment. The document grows across 8 months. By the spring of 1900, Alaric Doone has a more precise map of the internal operations of Halverson Industries than any of the company's 3 direct competitors, any of its banking partners, and most of its own senior staff. He has paid for none of it. He has taken nothing that could be called theft. He has simply listened, consistently, patiently, with the kind of attention that a lonely person inside a locked system will eventually give everything to receive. In March of 1900, he writes a letter to a business associate in Chicago. The letter does not mention the Halverson name. It references, in careful, indirect language, the timing of a specific rail contract negotiation scheduled for late April, a negotiation that no one outside the Halverson inner circle should know exists yet. The associate in Chicago makes 3 phone calls. A competing bid is quietly assembled, and somewhere in the Halverson accounting records, a small number shifts. Too small to be alarming, too precise to be accidental. Corvin Halverson will notice it in 6 weeks. By then, it will already be too late to stop what has been set in motion, because the damage was never about the money. It was about how much of the map had already been handed over. One letter at a time, by a woman who only wanted someone to ask her what she thought. Chapter 6: The deal dies on a Wednesday. Not slowly, not with warning signs that a careful man might have caught in time. It dies the way a candle dies in a closed room. One moment it is burning, and the next moment the air is simply gone. Corvin Halverson is sitting across from 3 representatives of the Midwest Freight Consolidation Group when the lead man, a stocky attorney from Cleveland named Prescott, slides a single sheet of paper across the table and says, quietly, that his clients have received a competing offer. Corvin looks at the paper. The competing figure is within 4% of the internal Halverson bid, a number that existed in exactly 2 documents, both of them locked inside the Halverson building, neither of them accessible to anyone outside the family's senior circle. Corvin does not show anything on his face. He asks for 48 hours to respond. Prescott says he will need an answer by morning. The meeting ends. The 3 men leave. Corvin sits alone in the conference room for 6 full minutes without moving, the competing offer face down on the table in front of him, his hands flat on the wood the way they were flat on the ledger 3 months earlier. This is the 3rd time in 5 months. The first was the Ohio Rail expansion, a bid that collapsed when a competitor arrived, with terms structured around the Halverson team's private concerns, the ones documented only in an internal memo that Renwick had written and shared with exactly 4 people. The second was a steel contract in Pittsburgh that fell apart the week before signing when the counterparties suddenly restructured their position in ways that addressed every vulnerability the Halverson legal team had identified in their private review. Now this. 3 deals. 3 collapses. 3 instances of external parties reacting to information they should not have had, at timings they should not have known, with precision that cannot be explained by coincidence or good guesswork. Corvin drives back to the office alone. He dismisses his secretary. He pulls the files on all 3 failed deals and lays them across his desk in chronological order. He does not call Renwick. He does not call Adair. He does not call Thurston in Washington. He works through the files himself line by line, tracing the sequence of who knew what and when they knew it, because whoever is feeding this information outside the organization has access to something specific, and specificity always has a source. By midnight, he has narrowed the timeline. Every piece of compromised information connects to a 6-week window. Every leaked detail traces back to conversations that happened inside the household, not the office, not the boardroom, not the legal team's meetings. The household, the dinner table, the drawing room, the private family correspondence. He opens the household correspondence log, cross-references the dates, follows the pattern backward through 4 months of entries until he reaches a name that appears consistently at the intersections, present at every dinner where the compromised topics were discussed. Living inside the household where the leaked details originated, connected by blood to every piece of information that has now appeared in the hands of his competitors. He closes the log. He sits in the dark for a long time. The machine he spent 30 years building was never broken from the outside. Every wall held. Every external control performed exactly as designed. The damage came from the one place he never thought to put a lock, the room where his own daughter sat quietly at the dinner table, listening to everything, because no one had ever once thought it mattered whether she heard. He picks up a pen, writes 1 word on a blank sheet of paper, Alaric. He does not know the last name yet. He does not know the face. What he knows is that somewhere in this city, a man has been receiving the internal architecture of the Halverson Empire through a channel so quiet, so personal, so completely outside the structure of his verification systems that it never once appeared in any report. And that man is not finished. Chapter 7. The memo goes out on a Tuesday morning before anyone else arrives at the office. Corvin writes it himself. No secretary, no dictation. His own hand in the plain block script he uses when he wants there to be no ambiguity about what is being communicated. It is 2 sentences. It covers a single policy change. It is distributed to every financial officer, every department head, and every authorized signatory in the Halverson organization by 9 o'clock. All future financial authorizations require dual verification. No exceptions. No substitutions. Effective immediately. By 10 o'clock, the questions start arriving at his door. Renwick comes first. He stands in the doorway of his father's office with the memo in his hand, and his jaw set in the particular way it sets when he is trying to determine whether he is being criticized or simply informed. He asks what prompted the change. Corvin tells him it is a structural improvement. Renwick studies his father's face for a long moment, reads nothing there, and leaves. Adair comes at 11. He is less measured than his brother. His first question is whether someone on staff has been caught taking something. Corvin says no. Adair asks a second question. Corvin does not answer it. Adair leaves. Thurston calls from Washington at 2 in the afternoon. His tone is careful, professionally measured. The tone of a man who has spent 11 years learning how to communicate concern without appearing to question authority. He asks whether there are specific contracts he should be aware of. Corvin tells him to implement the new verification protocol on everything currently in motion and to report any resistance from counterparties immediately. The call ends. The office goes quiet. What none of them know, what only one other person in the city knows, and that person is currently sitting in his apartment on the Lower West Side, reading through a series of letters he has received over the past 11 months, is that the memo is not a policy improvement. It is a wall being built after the fire has already moved through the house. Corvin has spent the 2 weeks since the Cleveland meeting conducting an investigation that does not appear anywhere in the official company records. He has not hired a detective. He has not involved lawyers. He has traced the information leaks backward through the household correspondence with the same methodical precision he applies to quarterly accounts. And he has identified, with enough certainty to act on, the shape of what happened. He does not have Alaric's last name yet. He has a physical description from a household servant and a reference in a social event register to a man who attended 3 events also attended by Lysandra in the spring of 1898. He has the name of a publishing venture that, when he sent a trusted associate to inquire about it, turned out to have no fixed office address and no listed principals. He has enough. What he does with it is the part that no one will ever write down. On the 3rd Thursday of March, 1901, Lysandra's social calendar is quietly restructured. 2 engagements are canceled without explanation. An invitation to a spring benefit, an event she has attended every year for 6 consecutive years, does not arrive. Her correspondence, which previously moved through the household mail system without inspection, begins arriving with a slight delay that she will eventually attribute to the postal service. She is not confronted. She is not accused. She is managed, the way the Halverson system manages every variable that has become a liability. Quietly, efficiently, without visible drama and without any acknowledgement that anything has changed at all. 1. Her father passes her in the hallway on a Friday morning and says good morning and asks whether she slept well. She says yes. He nods. He continues to his office. That is the last personal conversation they will ever have. Because, across town, Alaric Doone has just received a letter, not from Lysandra, but from one of his Chicago associates, and the letter contains information that tells him the window is closing. The Halverson verification wall is going up. The channel is being sealed. He has 3 weeks of operational access remaining, and he intends to use every single day of them. Chapter 8. 3 weeks moves fast when a man is disciplined about it. Alaric spends the first week executing the final 3 information transfers he has already set in motion: a rail contract timing disclosure to a competitor in Cincinnati, a steel acquisition detail sold through an intermediary in Baltimore, and a Washington correspondence thread passed to a lobbying group that has been paying for Halverson political intelligence since the previous autumn. He collects the payments through arrangements that move through 4 separate hands before reaching him. None of the transactions carry his name. None of the money arrives at an address connected to him. He spends the second week in motion, systematically dismantling the traces. The letters from Lysandra, all 41 of them, are burned in the fireplace of his apartment on a Tuesday evening. The separate document he has maintained for 11 months, the precise operational map of the Halverson system, annotated in his own hand across 14 pages, is destroyed the same night. The locked box goes into the river. The apartment is vacated on Thursday. The furniture belongs to the building. He leaves nothing behind except a forwarding address in Boston that connects to a name he has not used in 3 years. By the 3rd week, Alaric Dune has effectively ceased to exist in New York City. No arrest, no warrant. No officer of the law standing at a door with a document requiring his presence anywhere. The exits were built into the plan from the beginning, not as an emergency measure, but as the final step of a design that was always meant to have a clean ending. He walks out of the city on a Thursday morning carrying 1 bag, boards a train at Penn Station under a name that does not appear in any Halverson record, and is gone before the first of the April rail reports reaches Corvin's desk. What he leaves behind is the damage. 1902 arrives, and the Halverson accounts begin their quiet, relentless descent. 40% of liquid capital lost by the end of the year, not in a single catastrophic event, but through the cumulative failure of initiatives that were already compromised before the verification wall went up. The Ohio rail expansion that collapsed. The Pittsburgh contracts that walked. The Washington relationships that quietly cooled when it became clear the Halverson intelligence pipeline had been sealed. 1903. 2 rail lines in the Ohio corridor are sold under valuation. Renwick manages the sale with his father's same controlled exterior, but the figures in the final documents are 22% below what the lines were worth 18 months earlier. The market did not move that number. The reputation did. 1904. Creditors who spent a decade extending favorable terms to the Halverson name begin asking questions they never asked before. The questions are polite. The implications are not. Tighter timelines, higher collateral. The invisible tax that gets applied to any enterprise whose internal stability has become a topic of conversation in financial circles. 1905. The first bankruptcy filing. A subsidiary, technically, legally separate from the primary structure. But there is no such thing as a contained bankruptcy when the parent name is Halverson, and every financial institution in the city is now paying attention. Corvin does not speak publicly. He issues no statements. He attends to business with the same controlled, precise, unreadable exterior he has maintained for 30 years, and if the men around him notice that the energy behind that exterior has changed, that something inside the machine has gone quiet in a way it never was before, none of them say so. Renwick asks once, in the autumn of 1903, whether there is anything his father wants to tell him about the source of the losses. Corvin looks at his son for a long moment. Then he says that the source has been identified and addressed, and that what remains is to manage the consequences with discipline. Renwick does not ask again, because Corvin Halverson's face, in that moment, holds something that his eldest son has never once seen there in 29 years of close observation. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter than both. The specific expression of a man who has identified exactly where he failed and has decided he will carry that knowledge alone for the rest of his life. He will carry it for 6 more years. Chapter 9. Lysandra moves to a house in upstate New York in the spring of 1902. The move is handled through a family attorney. The house is modest by Halverson standards. A 7-room property on a quiet road outside Albany, staffed by 2 people, maintained without visible difficulty. The financial arrangement that supports it is drawn from a separate account that does not appear in the main family records. Everything is managed cleanly. Everything is handled without public acknowledgement. The family's official correspondence, for the remainder of the decade, does not contain her name. She is 26 years old when she leaves New York. She will live another 27 years. Those 27 years are not documented in any Halverson record. There are no letters from her in the family archive. There are no photographs of her at family events, because she does not attend family events. There are no accounts of her social life, her daily routine, her state of mind, or her feelings about what happened, because no one in the family ever asked, and she never offered, and the silence between them settled into something permanent and unspoken that lasted until Corvin died in 1909. She did not attend the funeral. The family did not comment on her absence publicly. Privately, among the household staff who remained from the old era, there was a single reference in a letter written by a woman named Celestine who had worked in the Halverson house for 14 years. Celestine wrote to a cousin in Baltimore that the youngest daughter had sent flowers to the funeral home without a card. Just flowers. White ones. Arranged without a note and delivered without explanation. That is the only record of what Lysandra felt about her father's death. Meanwhile, the Halverson name was quietly completing its collapse. 1907 brought estate liquidation proceedings, a formal, legal, documented unwinding of the assets that remained after 5 years of sustained loss. The rail lines were gone. The steel contracts had passed to competitors. The Washington relationships that Thurston had maintained for 11 years were now maintained on behalf of other clients. Because the Halverson political infrastructure had nothing left to offer, and everyone involved understood this without needing it stated directly. The final estate value, documented in the proceedings of 1907, was $3.7 million, from $900 million. In the same years, across the city and across the country, other dynasties were consolidating. The Rockefeller family was executing the structural tools that would carry their wealth across 6 generations, generation-skipping trusts, the Rockefeller Foundation, twice-yearly family gatherings that kept 250 descendants aligned in purpose and direction. They understood that a fortune without a designed container will find every crack and run out through all of them at once. The Halverson system had a container. It had been engineered specifically to prevent exactly the kind of external attack it eventually suffered: dual verification, defined roles, multi-layer accountability. 30 years of methodical, disciplined, rigorous financial architecture. But a container with a person-shaped hole in it is not a container. It is a liability with good paperwork. And somewhere in this city, in the records of the financial intermediaries who processed the intelligence that dismantled the Halverson Empire between 1899 and 1901, there is a trail that leads to a man who collected an estimated $11 million, the equivalent of over $200 million in today's money, and walked away from it without a single legal consequence. He was never charged, never named publicly, never brought into any courtroom or official proceeding connected to the Halverson collapse. Because the one person who could have named him was living in a 7-room house outside Albany with 2 staff members and a private financial arrangement, and she had made a decision, visible in the silence of every year that followed, that whatever Alaric Doone had taken from her family, she had already paid a cost that no courtroom could address. The money was the smaller loss. Chapter 10. Here is what the final accounting shows. Alaric Doone walks away with $11 million in redirected assets, $200 million in today's money, and lives the remainder of his life under a sequence of names in a sequence of cities, each one clean, each one untraceable, each one built on the same skill that built all the others. He reads people. He finds the gap between what they need and what they are receiving. He fills that gap with attention and patience and the specific practiced warmth of someone who understands that the most valuable currency in any closed system is not money. It is the feeling of being seen. He dies in 1931 in a city that is not New York, in a house registered to a name that is not his, leaving behind no family, no public record, and no account of what he did or how he did it. The money, by then, has moved through enough hands and enough arrangements that no single institution holds enough of it to trace it back to its origin. He takes the story with him, completely, finally, without remainder. Corvin Halverson dies in 1909. He is 63 years old. His estate? After the liquidation proceedings and the debt settlements and the attorney fees and the final accounting of everything that remained from a $900 million empire, totals $3.7 million. His sons, Renwick and Adair, receive equal shares. The Washington arrangement is dissolved. The family name, once capable of moving legislation and opening doors across 7 states, becomes a reference point in financial history, the kind of reference that appears in footnotes, in cautionary analyses, in the lectures of men who teach other men how not to build dynasties. This is the verdict the ledger produces. But the ledger is not where the real verdict lives. The real verdict lives in the design assumption that Corvin Halverson embedded into every layer of his system and never once examined, the assumption that a person could be given proximity to power and denied participation in it, could be raised inside a machine and assigned a function rather than a life, could be managed and positioned and directed from the age of consciousness to the age of 22, and still remain loyal to the structure that produced those conditions. He built walls against every external threat he could name. He never named the threat that lives inside a person who has been told, through every year of their life, that their mind does not matter and their presence is decorative, and their function is social, and their feelings are irrelevant to the operation of the enterprise they were born into. He never named it because he never thought it needed a name. Alaric Doone named it on the first night he met Lysandra Halverson. He identified it in 22 minutes of careful observation, the specific quality of her attention, the precision of her analysis, the way she spoke when spoken to, as though the words had been stored under pressure for a very long time. He saw exactly what she needed and exactly what she had been denied. He built everything that followed on that single, accurate observation. This is not a story about betrayal. It is a story about what happens when a system treats a person like a component, and that person meets someone who treats them like a human being. And the difference between those two experiences is large enough to redirect a dynasty. The Halverson Empire was not destroyed by the market. It was not destroyed by competition or legislation or the natural forces that ended so many fortunes of the Gilded Age. It was destroyed by a conversation, a series of conversations, quiet and unhurried and completely invisible to every verification system ever designed, between a woman who only wanted to be heard and a man who understood, with cold and total precision, exactly what that was worth. $3.7 million is what remains of $900 million. The ledger closes. The clock on the mantel reads the same time it always reads in rooms where something irreversible has just been understood. And across the country, in this very moment, there are systems just like the Halverson system. Organizations, families, institutions built on the assumption that the people inside them can be managed rather than valued, directed rather than heard, assigned a function and expected to remain loyal to a structure that has never once asked whether that function is enough. Some of those systems have already been found. They just do not know it yet. If this story made you stop and think about the systems you live inside, about the people around you who have never been asked what they think, about the difference between being managed and being valued, then share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell us which part of this story hit you the hardest and why. Your answer might be exactly what someone else in this community needs to read today. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story, because the next dynasty we examine collapsed for a reason that is even more personal than this one. And the details will not be what you expect. Every story on this channel is built to make you think, to make you feel, and to give you something you can carry forward. Do not miss it.